guest today is Daan Luining. Daan is the co-founder of a company in Holland called Meatable that's working to produce a meat substitute, which is actually real meat in the sense that it's almost indistinguishable from a meat you would get from a cow, except that that cow doesn't have to be grown and butchered. It's all produced in the lab to produce basically as identical of a product as possible in terms of texture and taste and aroma and Maillard-Browning reactions when you cook it and stuff like that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys reaching out to me, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this stuff today. It's a really fascinating field.
Thank you. Thank you. Really looking forward to the conversation. We had already great introduction before and really got me excited to talk to you. So I'm really looking forward to telling you more about the crazy stuff that we're doing.
Yeah, so why don't you start by telling me a little bit about your background. I know you worked for a nonprofit for a little while, and kind of what led you here to co-found this company.
It has been quite of a long journey to end up in this field because it didn't exist 10 years ago. It's very new, very early. So all the experiences that I had is always a proxy of something, because I studied molecular biology, learning about cells, how cells work, and usually the application for that is medicine. What can we do with cells in the body to make it healthier or to change stuff, or what are the effects of diet or other stuff on our bodies, and those are in the realm of molecular biology. Through that, I became passionate about a field in cell biology called tissue engineering. So understanding how we can make complex stuff that you're made of, like skin or liver or what have you inside of your body, and then figuring out if we can replace some of that. If it gets diseased or damaged, that we can take some of your own cells, grow them outside of your body, and then give them back to you in a more healthier state or supporting the damage that had occurred. In that consortium, I became aware of an idea that was arising, which was using animal cells, but not for creating tissues for medicine, but for consumption. So we came to a point in time where we can take cells from an animal, grow them, and then make muscle tissue from it, and we can make fat from it. And that's food. That literally is food. That's the stuff that we take from an animal. And I was looking at that proposal, I'm like, that is pretty wild. And that's going to change the world if it succeeds. I want to participate in that. That resulted eventually in this first burger that was made without killing animals. I reached out to a nonprofit organization in New York, asking them, hey, I want to grow this field. You're the only organization in the world right now that is funding academic research or any type of research in this field. Let me help. So moved to New York, did that for a while, and then through that connection came into contact with my other co-founders. A neurosurgeon at the University of Cambridge that created a breakthrough technology, again in the medical space, but then applying that for our cause was the thing that I convinced him of. And then from that started the company about 7 years ago called Meatable. And that's basically what we do. We take a cell from an animal. This can be a pig, a cow. That's the things that we're mainly focused on. We can also do chicken and fish, but it's a bit more difficult. Take those cells. The animal goes on living its life. No harm done. And then we can use the quality of those cells, which is, growing. And that's what you're doing right now. I'm growing cells right now. Cells multiply all the time. It's like every month for a new skin, a week for your intestines. You are continuously growing. And that's a characteristic of cells. That's fantastic. We can use that. So we make use of those characteristics of cell growth, put it into a brewing kettle, like brewing beer, and then feeding it the nutrients that cow cells require instead of a yeast. They multiply, and once we have enough of them, we make muscle and fat from them. And that's what we can eat. And I think that's just a delightful thought that you can literally eat a steak from an animal that is sitting right next to you, living his happy life. And that's one of the biggest drivers I have. Like, wow, that would be really cool if we can just feed people the stuff that they really like, but then not killing the animals for it would be I think a big benefit. Besides, and of course, the climate impact that it has.
I assume you're starting with stem cells and then allowing natural metabolic processes basically to grow those and differentiate them. So you're creating, proteins, fats, collagen, other connective tissues, and so
Yeah, that's
forth.
right.
How do you end up with a structure of a particular cut of meat from that?
There's a lot of questions in there, and it's pretty complex, right? I just explained it to you in a nutshell, but there's so many things involved because only the word stem cell that already has a lot of content to it because not all stem cells are the same. You have different types of stemness and different types of stem cells. And already thinking about how the characteristics of each of these stem cells would work on a very large scale is important. So we use a cell which is very early in development called a pluripotent stem cell. And this means that this cell can become anything. It can muscle, fat, connective tissue, even skin if we would want to. But of course, that's not of interest to us. Mainly the muscle and the fat is interesting to us. And then microbes are used, but not in the way maybe that you think about it, because microbes can produce, for example, vitamins on a larger scale that we can find in nature. And, the cells need everything that a normal cow would also eat, but then broken down in the smallest pieces that the cell can readily absorb, because it doesn't have a gut anymore, right? So it cannot break food down for itself. So you need to find glucose and amino acids and vitamins. And there is where the realm of fermentation comes into place. We feed microbes glucose and they make products that we finally feed to the animal cells. Not necessarily in combination because the cells don't have an immune system anymore, so they're fragile. So we keep them in this closed environment. Same what you do with beer, right? You don't want to have a different microbe than yeast in beer because they will spoil the beer. Same for us. But we can feed the stuff that what the bacteria made indirectly to the culture. Then the final question you had is that how do you distinguish between different cuts? We're not making whole cuts right now. That is very challenging. The previous research which I did in tissue engineering called angiogenesis, in a very fancy word, it's basically the formation of blood vessels through your body. Making sure that if you make a thick cut, that all cells will be delivered the nutrients and the oxygen and all the things that it needs to thrive is absolutely not realistic right now. So we're doing it in a unique way where we are putting cells. It's literally more like beer brewing, where the cells float into this nutrient broth, like with the vitamins and the glucose and stuff, and then we make little spheres out of them. And little, I mean like 300 micrometers to 400 micrometers. And then, like you said, we differentiate them. And then for maybe people that don't know what differentiation means, it's the transformation of one cell state to the other. So you have a stem cell that doesn't have a function, and when it differentiates into a muscle cell, then that's what we call differentiation. So suddenly it has a function, which is contracting. Or in the case of fat cells, it's energy storage. And that's the process that we do there. So growing little spheres of the stem cells and then instructing them to become either muscle or fat. And that's when what we collect, we blend, we make a batter. You can make the British Bangor or chipolata or a hot dog or anything that the country or the jurisdiction where we are at would resonate with, and that's then what we sell. So it's always going to be a one-step process for making a dumpling or a sausage or a nugget or something like that. It's not whole cuts.
You're also creating collagen, and I assume, you're going to need all of the volatile molecules that are fat soluble that give the taste of that particular protein, and sugars and acids, like isovaleric acids and other things that are so important part of the aroma and the taste of that particular meat. But then you also need, like I mentioned, the collagen, so that you can, when you cook the meat, depending on what kind of meat you're kind of going for, which I guess is the next question, are you trying to replicate a particular one type of cut right now? And so breaking that down into gelatin or, like we mentioned, the Maillard reaction, so you have particular amino acids which are going to break down differently into different compounds depending on and what they are on the sugars and so forth.
Yeah, no, but it's a very good question because I did since I'm a molecular biologist, I'm not a food scientist. I had to venture out in this field and try to unite these two ideas because food scientists are molecular biologists, but more applied because they work in the realm of amino acids and collagen and that stuff. But we're working with cells that produce these type of things. So there's a lot of overlap, but they are two separate words. And what I found is that you don't necessarily need the entire spectrum of compounds to do complete biomimicry. For example, the collagen. Collagen is made by a different cell than a muscle or a fat cell. They're made by fibroblasts, which is a connective tissue cell. And if you want to make hot dogs or a nugget or a dumpling, collagen doesn't play a huge role in the development of flavor. Usually, this is a functional protein, if we would say it in the food scientific terms, that it either binds water or gelates or gives this breakdown profile that is unique if you have high connective tissue products, meat products. And those are usually not the highest valued pieces when it comes from the animal. Usually you want either very fatty or very high in proteins or very high muscular. No, if you have a lot of connective tissue in there, you need to either do a broil or like take a long time, because collagen breaks down over time. 70 something degrees Celsius, and then it turns into gelatin. So it loses its tertiary structure, so which is this fibrous structure, falls apart in a very specific way, and then you make like gelatin, which is great for its functionality. But if you want to make nuggets, gelatin is not necessarily what you want. But what you do want is the specific profile of proteins that, if it would break apart, it would create the precursors that are available in the Maillard reaction to bind to the sugars and also the oxidation of the lipids, that it will create this unique profile. And there's, I think, we have a huge advantage over, for example, plant-based alternatives, which, have been great. The development there has been pretty staggering. Like, whoa, we've come a long way there. But you'll always create a proxy of an animal flavor. And since the cells are animal cells, they will recreate the exact same stuff that they would do in the animal. So we're making actual pig fat. We're actually making pig protein. And when we age the meat, and in the Dutch we have a word for that, which is basically dyeing, because you cannot eat fresh meat from a cow or a pig. There's always a process in between where the muscle tissue would undergo oxidative stress, which increases the lactate content inside of the muscle and breaks down the proteins in a very specific way. There has been amazing studies, and I found out about this entire process when I ordered very old books, because this research has been done for decades. So if you are a molecular biologist, you go online and you start looking for the latest of the latest, but that's not where it's at in food science. Sometimes things have been done in the 20s to 30s, and those things are still true. So I was reading through these old books and then actually realized that you need to hang meat for at least 3 days in a refrigerated environment. And this creates this stretching of muscles, because else you get rigor mortis. You don't want that. It's very tough, right? Then your meat gets very tough. So you want to stretch it in a way that allows for a controlled breakdown process of your muscle fibers in a very specific pattern. If your pH is too high, it will lose too much water, and then you will retain too much water, and you will create something called DFP. So it's pale soft exudate. So it's this very mushy types of water content. It's like basically biting into a washcloth. Disgusting. And if it loses too much water with a high pH, then it becomes like beef jerky. So it's very tough. So there's this very narrow bandwidth in between where you create this unique environment where it softens up the meat, will break down enough of the proteins that it releases enough water, and will establish the precursors that upon cooking will react with the Maillard reaction and oxidizes enough so that you can make this plethora of flavors that you would experience upon eating. And that's going to be very important. And there's another thing that I found. Maillard reaction is the reaction between proteins and sugars. But then I was looking at these books and I felt like, okay, so where does the sugar come from? The backbone of DNA is a ribose. Yes, and that's where the sugar comes from. And then I realized, oh my God, DNA is yummy. You need to have DNA to help proteins bind to glucose, and that's where the ribose of the DNA backbone comes into place. And I thought it was just fascinating to realize that all these components have a role to play in the experience of eating food.
And then you're using proteases that are naturally in the meats to basically mimic, or not mimicking, but you're actually doing the aging process much in the same way that you would with a real animal once you've basically unplugged it.
when we spin it down, right, we use a centrifuge to remove the liquid where it's residing in, because cells like to live in a very like in water like substances, but then with all the nutrients in it. But then we remove that by centrifugation, and then the cells will just undergo similar oxidative stress. We don't, they cannot extract air from the oxygen, so they will start using the remaining glucose inside of their cells, which will not be into the electron transportation chain, which is very complex. But it's basically the same thing when you're going to the gym. If you're not producing enough oxygen to your muscles, they will sour and it produces lactate. Same for our cells. They start producing lactate. And this is then what activates certain proteases or breaks down certain molecules. So this is a very similar but slightly different, because we're not cutting off oxygen supply the same way if you would do from a cow. And that's where we're investigating, what does that mean exactly. There's no blood involved. There's no lungs involved that and hearts that pump out oxygen, but still we need to make sure that the breakdown profiles are similar, because that what gives unique flavor, what people are looking for. So this is an ongoing investigation, and it's fascinating to unite these two fields, that how we treat cells and then how it translates into taste and texture and flavor is, I think, only this decade that we are starting to think about it in those senses.
You mentioned lactate, which is what is produced in animals because of, we have a pH, most animals have pH around 7.4, right? So it's going to produce lactate as opposed to lactic acid, which would be produced by bacteria in more acidic conditions,
that's right.
Are you manipulating the pH specifically, or is that, again, just a natural part of the process?
Only during the alive phase. When the cells are alive and eating, they also are producing lactate, and there's where we are controlling the environment. Since if you have a too high or too low pH, all the cells die. It's simple as that. They don't have kidneys, they don't have livers, they don't have ways to get rid of the metabolites, so we do it for them. And this also creates an opportunity for us, since we want to produce as much cells as possible in the shortest amount of as possible, and we can. The amount of time that we use to create our products is around 12 days for a full cycle, while a pig is 3 years. And we do this by removing the waste. So we have a filter inside of the fermenter where we keep the cells inside of the fermenter, remove the lactate and the other stuff that they are producing that we don't want to have, and add in new food. And they call this perfusion in a very fancy word. And this way you can actually concentrate the amount of cells that you can eventually produce many folds over from a batch process that is comparable to, for example, beer making. Beer, it's food in, yeast in, it eats the food. When it's done, beer is made. And in our case, the beer is not the product, it's the cells. It's the yeast, but in our case, it's animal cells. And therefore, we can remove the excess stuff that we don't want to have and add in new food for the cells to intensify the culture.
Are you eventually trying to get to particular textures of real cuts of meat? Or are you really trying to do like sausages and nuggets and foods like that that are more processed foods that are easier because in terms of the process that you guys are doing, rather than creating whole cuts, which I understand would be enormously complicated?
It's enormously complicated. I think it's a gliding scale. With enough time and enough success, we want to move into a more diverse portfolio of products we can make. But this is very difficult. It's very high tech. So we wanted to do the less hard thing first, because it's pretty hard, but let's do sausage first, because that seemed to be the low hanging fruit. And then move on to the more complex things. And it will be dependent on the market we can launch in. There's an entire regulatory area that, man, it is so complex. Food is not to be messed with. People take food very seriously because everybody eats. Especially in Europe, apparently, that there's a huge regulatory burden on proving that what you're putting into the market is safe for consumption. So it's to us the burden to prove that, right? We can say like, yeah, no, it's just animal cells, but it's like, okay, prove it. And then since it's a very new product, it's very hard to do that because, okay, so what do you want? Because comparing us to normal meat seems strange because there's no slaughtering process. So the regulations around slaughtering and waste removal and that type of stuff, it's a sterile process. It's a completely closed environment. So there's no E. coli, Listeria, Salmonella. It doesn't exist. So why do you want us to test for that? That seems strange. So we're working this out, and depending on the jurisdiction that where we can launch in, will determine what type of products we bring to market.
It seems like thinly sliced beef we would use for a stir fry or something wouldn't be too hard.
There's another company doing that in Israel. They're doing beef, but then trying to do like bigger chunks, which is great. I think there is enough space in this huge market for everybody because, man, food is like I told you before, food is crazy, especially as you think about the numbers. In the Netherlands alone, and we're 17 million, right? Like 1.7. We eat about 2.5 million kilograms of meat every day.
Yeah, I mean, the consumption of beef, cows outweigh humans on Earth.
Yeah, there's this cool diagram, right, where you can see that there's 4% wild animals, 60 something percent domesticated animals, and then the 36 something percent there's humans. And the 60 something percent disappears every year into the 36% when it comes to vertebrates. So this is land terrestrial animals, so there's no fish or bacteria involved, but that just, I think it's about 40 billion animals that we slaughter every year. And to think that, yeah, and then to think that there's more mouths to feed every day, we have to do something. And I think this is going to be, for me, it's always an and solution. I'm not here in telling people what to eat, what to think, what to feel. I'm just trying to create something delicious so that if they would have a choice, that they have an alternative option besides an animal or a plant, but something that is a bit more sustainable, but still delicious. Because I think what we've seen from the data is that that's the number one priority. You can create a product that is better for the environment, better for who knows what, but if it doesn't taste good, people won't buy it or eat it. And there's the philosophy of the discussion that we're having today. Make the stuff that people love to eat, which is animal fats, which is animal protein, and then make it sure that they can cook it easily and put it in a product that they actually enjoy eating. That's where my conviction comes from, that make stuff that is delicious.
There's all kinds of sustainability issues with raising animals. There's health ramifications of eating animal fats, which is something I'd like to ask you specifically about. Are you replicating the exact fats, or is there a way that you can manipulate it so that, especially if you're producing a product like a sausage or a nugget or whatever, it seems like there's an opportunity there to put in mono or polyunsaturated fats, omega-3 fats, things like that that are going to make the product a lot more healthful as well. And then also there is so many, we'll say, calories used to produce like a gram of meat. I don't remember what the number is off the top of my head. But in terms of the
27 for a cow, 17 for a pig.
It's crazy compared to other protein sources that are closer to or are plants. So there's that whole aspect as well. And then the last part of the question is the cost of producing it and the scale of producing it. Is just something that can be scaled up to really make an impact on how much meat from animals we eat globally.
Right. This is I think a topic where a modesty should come from this field, since we're not there yet. We're not producing millions of kilograms. We're not having factories all over the world to produce this. This is early beginnings, but it's about to start to get really big. When you're said in the beginning the production of the fats that we make and how healthy they are. Right now, we're making the exact same thing. So if you would ask me, is this healthier? It's as healthy as eating the animal component. So don't eat 120 kilograms per person per year. And those are the numbers that we get from the US. Those are the consumption rates. That's too much. Don't eat 120 kilograms per person per year worth of meat. That's a lot. A little bit of moderation would be wise for health reasons. Eventually, when we got that process under control and we can produce enough so that people just have normal diets worth of consumption, then we can start thinking about, all right, how can we maybe adjust the feed? Because you are what you eat, and the same goes for cells. So what we feed the cells and how we treat them will eventually come back in nutrient profile that these cells have. But then we have to do the research on if we adjust the feed, if we adjust the growth, if we adjust anything from the surroundings of the areas, because we want to empower the cells to do their own thing. We don't want to intervene a lot to say, oh no, just make these types of fat or what, because the cells knows best. Cells know best on how to be a cell and how to be a fat cell or how to be a muscle cell. So let them do the job, but just provide them with the nutrients to do their thing. But then how that translates to flavor or health benefits, no idea, but so interesting. And I think that's a unique moment in time that we have to start thinking about these type of issues. It will be a gradual process over time, and it's the same thing with scaling. So you mentioned also scaling. This is not a software product. This has to come from factories. Right now everybody says, well, it comes from a lab, right? But that won't be in the end. This won't come from a lab in the end. The same way that your cornflakes doesn't come from a lab, it comes from a factory. And cornflakes were once developed in the lab, but not anymore. That's just the environment that we're working in right now. And building factories and scaling up takes time. This will be a gradual process where people will be introduced and have the opportunity to interact with the product, mainly first in a restaurant, because I think there is the opportunity for us to create a pleasant experience. Because if you just dump a product in the market and say, well, here you go, good luck with it, usually people don't have the best experience with that because they don't know what it is or how to cook it or how to pair it, or it's a strange new thing. So first you want to go to a restaurant and say, we'll create some unique experience for you and understand also the uniqueness of the product. And restaurants are this great place to do it. When you have somebody at your table saying, today we're serving you this unique product and it's paired and the chef has made this special thing for you, realize that what you're eating right now is revolutionary. You don't have that in the supermarket. You don't have that interaction with consumers. So that's why I think restaurants is such a great place to get started. And then when people are getting more accustomed, they go back to their families and say, I went to this restaurant and I tried this cultivated meat. It's pretty great. That's the moment where people are like the majority, so not the early adopters, but the majority thinking, oh, okay, if Uncle Dan over there has tried it and he says it's all right, maybe I should give it a go. And they will try it and they'll say, okay, well, a pretty great experience. All right. Apparently they're now scaling up and there's more produced, and suddenly I see it in a supermarket. Oh, I remember when I ate it in the restaurant, it was pretty all right. Let me try it if I can make something for my family or my guests, because food is such an emotional topic in people's lives. Some people identify with what they how and what they eat. You got vegetarian, vegans, pescatarians, what have you-tarians, all these variations of how people express who they are with what they eat. And I think this is definitely one of those products that fall into that. Like, how do you feel about this product, and what type of thing does it say about you when you buy it or consume it or make it? So when we're scaling up, that gradual process is making people aware and accustomed. It's not going to be a revolution. It's not. Even though I want it to be, I wish we could go faster and bigger, that everybody had this on their plate tomorrow. We also understand the sensitivity and also understand the limitations of this entire food process and how complex it is. So that's why I started off with the conversation with humbleness and appreciation of what we have. That we can go to a supermarket and there's food for us, that we can feed our families. And then when you want to create something new, you have to do that with respect. And I think that's what we're all about in the company.
Yeah, I think starting with restaurants makes sense. I remember in the late 80s, I think, went to a high-end restaurant and had sous vide meat for the first time. And they were talking about, oh, this is this new thing and blah, 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 blah. And, and now you can, for $100, you can buy a home sous vide machine. I wanted to go back for a minute, though, and ask you about fats, because you mentioned how fats carry, obviously fats carry flavor in terms of, fat-soluble volatiles, but the fat molecules themselves, and I know that there's research being, we've identified fat receptors on the tongue that are, some consider like a sixth taste. But I don't really know too much about where that research is at and how we interpret those tastes. If it's more of a an unctuousness kind of, or if there's actually a taste more like an umami kind of taste that we associate with fats based on those receptors in the tongue.
What we have found from the research that we have done so far is that fat, in case for pork, creates a animalic signature. And what I mean with that is that the fats will help you identify the animal that you're eating it from. Pork fat and cow fat taste very differently. So if you add just only fat to your blend, so no muscle but just fat, people will able to tell it's pork. And which molecule is responsible for that, we don't know. But usually what we see from any flavor experiments that we do, that's always a composition. People can taste some compounds in parts per billion, like very small fractions. And the concentration of that molecule or fat is usually very important because, for example, flavors that our taste panel would describe as boar, so very gamey flavor, those come from usually sulfuric compounds in your product, but very low concentrations because humans are very sensitive to sulfuric compound. But if you have too much of it, it will taste off. But too little, you will lose the flavor. So it's a very complex system. Taste is one of the most complex things because it's also hard to ask people what their experience is if you don't provide them with the right vocabulary. We internally have educated a tasting panel from the team members to be able to describe certain flavors and then classify them so you can do comparative analysis. So then you will create stuff that's called a flavor wheel, which then you have certain flavors on the outside, which are basically the description of the stuff that you taste. And by giving people these types of tools, it normalizes the experience a bit more, but still for each person it's quite unique. We had to do some rigorous training. We started with I think 40 people, and only like 10 of them eventually ended up in the tasting panel because they could taste enough. Not everybody tastes the same. There's always this very fun experiment that people do. For example, the coriander thing, right? If you're a super taster, some people don't like coriander, some people do like coriander. And that also translates into the stuff that you eat. So how fats are evolved? Very much so, but it's only one part of the equation. It's proteins, it's sugars, it's lipids, it's thymines, all these things together creates a symphony of flavors that then we would recognize as a specific product. Because mushrooms have a lot of protein and fats in them, but they don't taste like pork. Why? They're made out of different variations of the proteins, lipids, and fats. So it's always this interplay. One of the things that fat does have, which the other compounds don't have, is what we call a coating effect. If you take a sip of olive oil, you'll notice the coating effect, right? It will linger in your mouth. It will bind. It will create this film. It's the same with animal fat. It will create a unique physical condition in your mouth that allows for flavor compounds to be transferred or not, or be dissolved. So it's very complex interplay.
I want to kind of dig in a little bit more, if we can, to this fats and fat receptors versus the flavors that are carried in fats. Because I know if you take pork fat and put it into really lean beef, for example, and mix it together, it's going to taste like pork because of exactly what you're describing. But I don't know how much of it is it the actual fatty acids themselves or the triglycerides that are part of that taste, or is it really just all of the compounds that are dissolved into the fats that is what's accounting for that taste? And you mentioned, for example, there's a term that I coined, osmosis, which is what you were describing, where you have a little bit of a compound, like isovaleric acid, for example, or butyric acid, are compounds, like Parmesan cheese has isovaleric acid, and in very small amounts, it's really important part of the flavor profile of that cheese. But if you have a lot of it, it smells like vomit. It's really horrible, right? So so having this correct balance is really important to identifying. And there's a lot of compounds like that in small amounts are a really important part of the taste of meat in particular. There's some really horrible smelling things in meat, but just in very small amounts that if they were missing, it wouldn't taste right.
That's why I make a plea for letting the cells do what they do, because we don't know exactly which molecule and which concentration is responsible for that single experience. It probably is not one. It probably is a multitude of these things together, because the plant-based people, what they are trying to do sometimes with glutamate, they add it to it because it gives umami flavor, but by itself, it's only one aspect. It's like MSG, right? You just put MSG in. So if you eat raw MSG, it's not delicious. It's usually the accompanying flavors or where it's carried in that creates the experience. So therefore, you need to let cells what they do best, because they will make that compound plus the other things that support that compound in the overall experience. I have a slide deck somewhere where you can see the volatile compound amount of normal beef, chicken, and pork. And what you see there, that it's not one thing. It's like in 50 compounds with all different concentrations. But if you remove one of them in that concentration, suddenly this thing falls apart like a house of cards, like falls into each other, because it never stands by itself. A flavor compound usually never stands by itself. It's the accompanying thing that creates a profile for you.
Right. So I guess what I'm getting to is more of, is there a way to make these products more healthful without changing the flavor profile of them, or at least not changing them to the point where they're no longer recognizable? Because if you're making a sausage, there's all kinds of stuff you can add to it that will kind of hide certain misses here and there. But if you can market a product that is a sausage that tastes just like a pork sausage, but it's got healthier fats in it, then I think there's definitely a market for that. I understand you're wanting to start with something simple and have market success, but eventually it would be nice to be able to get there, to make those products.
I'm right with you. I'm right with you on that. I just need to convince the team that, that they will find the time to do the research, right? So it's a stepwise process. So if you check in with me in another couple of years, I probably can tell you more about what we have done so far. But unfortunately, that's a part that we haven't paid a lot of attention to yet, since we are more on the mission getting market success first, and then look into those complex, because there are complex questions later.
So what does your timeline look right now? And, when can people outside of Holland try your stuff? When do you think it'll be available in some way? And then I guess the next step would be to send it to certain restaurants and allow people to experience, and then ultimately to get into supermarkets.
Right. Singapore next year. And that's pretty soon, it's December already, so we're quite excited by that. We're waiting to enter that market. It's going to be first test case, right? First get consumer feedback, first know how it is to going from a development company to a selling company, right? That's pretty unique for us. And then main market focus currently is going to be probably Asia. They're not so food secure as the rest of the world, so they're really looking for alternatives in this manner. Probably then hopefully is United States. Currently with the political change, we said, well, let's do Asia first and see how everything plays out. The FDA is also working on creating guidelines on how to deal with this type of product, so that it's also a little bit strategic to see, okay, let's wait for them to figure stuff out, and then we can work together with them to get this there to market. Probably last going to be Europe. It's pretty sad to say, but since I'm it's our backyard, but getting on the market in Europe is a very lengthy process. And as a company that is currently not making any money, not making revenue, you have to find your market fit first. And that's like Asia, United States, and then probably Europe.
Well, it's super exciting. I mean, I can't wait to get to the point where I can try one of your products and, see what it's like.
You're always welcome to come to the Netherlands, to the office space, and we can cook you up something. That's for sure. But then in a restaurant, in the supermarket, you'll have to wait a little bit longer than that. But always we're happy to host you if you're around.
I went to Zandvoort a few years ago
for the Formula One races.
Well, I used to be involved in teaching people, race car drivers and instructors and so forth. And so I've been to a lot of tracks around the world. So I was there at that track.
Great.
And then and my son ended up meeting me, and then we went to Amsterdam, and then we kind of toured around a few countries. So yeah, it was.
So
pretty
you're
interesting.
familiar
But
in the
yeah,
neighborhood. So that it's always 30-minute bike ride away. It doesn't matter where in the Netherlands you are. 30-minute bike ride and you're almost everywhere. So please let me know.
Yeah, I tried to bring my bike on the plane, and they wouldn't let me bring it on.
No, that's well. We have plenty of them here, so there's always one for
Yes,
you. Yeah,
you certainly do.
yeah, we certainly do.
So, so is there anything else you want to tell me about the technology or kind of where you're going with the company?
I can always roll out the credits saying, well, we need less resources, we have less greenhouse gas emissions, we have less, there's no disease involved in it, all these things. But I think the thing that I care about most is making sure that people will have enough to eat for the coming centuries, and that we're not here to tell people what to do, but really provide a delicious alternative for them. And then what they care about most, I think hopefully they can find it in the product that I provide. And I love to hear from people if they think like, hey, I actually care about environment, or I care about animal welfare, or I care about family, feeding my family, making sure I have enough food on the table. All those things also matter to me. So that's maybe this is more of a reach out to anybody that has questions. I'm always happy to answer any of them, because the reason why I wake up in the morning is just to try to do good, just try to do a little bit better in the world, and making sure that we have something we can share a delicious meal with friends and family. So that's maybe that's a good way to end off.
No, awesome. I so appreciate what you guys are doing on a number of levels. It's super interesting to me as a food scientist, but also, in terms of sustainability, in terms of food security, there's so many areas where this is so important. And so I really thank you, for starting this and really putting your all into it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the food science questions. I have very little opportunity to talk about that aspect of the business, but truly a treat for me. Thank you for that.
All right. Well, Daan, thank you so much again for all your time and again for what you're doing. And I will definitely keep in touch and keep my eye on what you're doing and look forward to being able to try it.
Great. See you in the Netherlands then.
Okay. Sounds good.
Cheers. Bye-bye.